Businessman and former South Carolina State Representative Williams Cogswell is now a candidate for mayor of the city of Charleston. Today, I talk one-on-one with Mr. Cogswell about his plans for the city, if elected, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. William Cogswell Jr., welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for having me, Quintin. Glad to be back.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm bringing you back on Quintin's Close-Ups because obviously you're a businessman, an entrepreneur, a husband, a father, and a former South Carolina State Representative who's now a mayoral candidate for the city of Charleston. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, you said this quote, "Today, I'm excited to announce my candidacy for mayor of Charleston. My goal is to bring vision, leadership, and accountability to the mayor's office. And I believe my personal, business, and political experience are what Charleston needs to ensure our best days are ahead. While the election is not until November 2023, there's a lot to do between now and then." Unquote. Let me ask you this, William. Who are you as a visionary leader?
Well, I would say that I have big ideas, but more importantly, Quintin, I have a track record of actually turning ideas into reality. I certainly did that. Have done that in the private sector with complicated projects like the cigar factory here downtown, but also the Garco Mill building, which is an old asbestos mill in North Charleston Park Circle area, where we also built a public park, the Navy Hospital that we took off the county's hands to a large-scale adaptive reuse effort on the old Navy Yard. So all of these projects were and are very complicated deals that most people thought we were crazy to take on, but through a lot of hard work, vision, leadership, and proactive initiatives, we were able to get them off the ground and turn ideas into reality. And too often what we see in government are just ideas with no real plan of action to get them turned into reality. So I want to bring the skill set that I've had in business and in politics too, and we can get into some of those, to the mayor's office and to help the city move forward, because I think we have a lot of good ideas, but just not a lot of action.
What good ideas can you turn into reality right now when it comes to the city of Charleston?
Well, take, for example, affordable housing. I think that it's an incredible need for the city. It has been talked about a lot. There have been some well-intended efforts to push it forward, but we're just not seeing results. We're not seeing solutions that really make meaningful strides in solving those problems. By the city's own account, where even if you were to count everything that is supposedly going to be delivered in the next 2 or 3 years, you're still going to be less than a third of what the need is. And that's just unacceptable to me. It's just not really aggressively addressing the problem. Same thing when it comes to infrastructure, be it flooding, be it roads. You have a lot of ideas and thoughts, but there's not much effort, it seems, put into how exactly all these things are going to be funded. And, a plan is just a plan if it's not a way to pay for it. A great example of that is the West Ashley revitalization TIP districts that have been studied for years now. And you look at what the results are, there's not much to show for it, unfortunately. And to me, that's unacceptable. I think there are ways that the city can not do it themselves, but certainly provide the catalyst for getting positive things to happen there. So it's things like that that I'm excited to bring to the table, and I think I have a skill set that will be well served.
And I want to talk to you about all of those issues in just a moment. But let me ask you, what has been your personal experience, Mr. Cogswell, with the residents of Charleston?
With the residents?
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, I grew up here, so I know it well, and can say that it's not just the city, but really the region that I'm pretty familiar with, because I've dealt with them on the private sector side, be it the county, both Berkeley and Charleston counties, certainly the state delegation members from the Tri-County area, and I have a really good relationship there through my time in the legislature. And actually have a good relationship with members of the federal delegation. And all of those are pretty important when it comes to actually getting things accomplished. So, in terms of the average voter in the city of Charleston, again, I think I understand what their day-to-day needs are and also what their long-term needs are. And I'm excited to bring that vision and leadership to the mayor's office.
So what are their long-term needs right now, Mr. Cogswell?
Again, I go back to infrastructure. I go back to flooding issues. I go back to affordable housing. I go back to a crime rate that's well above the national average. You can get down to, I think there should be more efficiencies on how your garbage is collected. I mean, you can get way into the weeds on some of this stuff. And really, I'll tell you, Quintin, it is different in different parts of the city. Some areas aren't as concerned about flooding as others. Some areas are more concerned about crime than others. So it really does go neighborhood by neighborhood, and I think you have to have a real finger on the pulse as to what those differences are. Look for a common goal. And move forward. So what we've been doing over the past several months is doing a lot of small gatherings all across the city: Daniel Island, Johns Island, James Island, downtown, various neighborhoods in West Ashley. And part of it is just for me to introduce myself and the ideas that I have, but it's really important for me to listen and get their feedback as to what their priorities are. And it's been very rewarding and helpful as we move forward in the campaign.
So what are the three biggest residential concerns right now?
Residential concerns?
Yes, sir.
Well, again, I think depending on what you're defining as residential, I would say, a lot of people just in their day-to-day lives, they're seeing their commutes take a hell of a lot longer than they did 5 to 7 years ago. I think, again, you've got affordability issues where it's not just affordable housing projects that are needed, but you have a lot of longtime residents that have been in their homes for, in some cases, generations, that are being taxed out because of just the growth that's happening around them. And they're not, that rising tide is not lifting all boats. And to me, that's unacceptable. And I think there's solutions to that. But in order to do something effectively there, you do need to work with the county, and you might need to get legislation passed at the state level. Well, that isn't a hurdle that I see as something, we can't do it because it's outside of our immediate sphere of influence. I think that is important to collaborate with the county and come up with a solution for those folks, like fixing their millage if they have or an owner-occupied home and have been in it for a longer, a certain period of time. So that's just one idea that I'd like to really explore. And again, the last one I would say in terms of residential is to go back to crime. I mean, crime, when you look at what the statistics are, it is not going in a good direction. And I think the police department needs to be supported. But also, when you think about crime and some of the root causes of it, one of my big initiatives is you have a lot of young kids that have a lot of time on their hands after they get out of school because a lot of the city rec leagues and playgrounds have been ignored or gutted. And to me, I think that we really need to invest back in our communities, especially in recreational centers, the playgrounds, and the rec leagues. And it doesn't have to come from the city's budget. I think there's a great opportunity to bring in the private sector there to help fund a lot of those improvements, and I think the private sector would be more than willing to do that. I also believe, I'll wrap up here in a second, Quintin, but I love the idea of working with off-duty firemen and policemen and figuring out a way to pay them time and a half through something like a good cheer fund, where they could coach some of these little league teams, so they're engaged with people in the community, parents and kids, in a very positive way versus wearing a bulletproof vest every time they see them. So again, it's all encompassing. It's a long-winded answer, Quintin, but I think you can tell my excitement about different ideas and possibilities.
So with that cheer fund, how much would that be?
I'm sorry, with what?
Yeah, with the cheer fund, how much would that be in the budget?
Well, again, I would propose this wouldn't be coming out of the city's budget. I think that we would go to, I would go to a lot of businesses it's the proverbial, I'm sponsoring the Little League team. And you just don't see as much of that as you used to. And I think not only does that strain the city budget, but more importantly, I think there's a disengagement of the community aspect of it. And to me, I think that's critically important. And if, as a business owner myself, I would love to give money for, cleats for the local Little League team, or pay for the baseball field to be restriped. I think it's a good thing for the private sector to come in and help on.
So which private partnership would you form for this, actually?
It could be any variety. I mean, like you take Harmon Field, for example, or you take the rec center needs out on Johns Island. I mean, either one of those two, and there are multiple more, right? And what you would do is you would go to businesses like like on Harmon Field, you'd go to maybe the Citadel, you'd go to Joe Riley Park's city owned, but you could go to the franchise owners of the River Dogs. You could go to the various businesses that are in West Edge and maybe help start repairing that relationship that has been torn over the Gadsden Creek by getting them to support the neighborhood center and working on Harmon Field and making sure that things like midnight basketball program could be reinstated. I mean, just small things that I think really mean a lot. And again, it's not the city or government doing all the work. It's them providing the idea, maybe the framework for it, but allowing the private sector to come in. And I do think it's in part, as a community leader, the mayor's job to go out and maybe twist a few arms to get people to do that, because again, it's for a positive good.
So what is your 5-point plan to save Gadsden Creek?
Well, I think that what's going on over there, it's been in multiple lawsuits. I think that was, I understand both sides of it. I think that it is frustrating for me to see a community like the West Side be at the losing end of what's going on. I mean, I think you've got a Park City-owned project across the street, and I think first and foremost, you need to make sure that the residents that live in the area are going to be respected and taken care of when you come up with a large-scale development plan like that. And again, I understand the issues involved on both sides of the fence. It's just really unfortunate for me that it got to where it is, where there's clear animosity between what has been developed over there and the neighborhood next door. So exactly what my plan would be for something like that, I mean, in hindsight, certainly would have done it differently. I think there was a way that could have been a win-win there. But I think one way to start repairing that bad blood is for the business, not just necessarily the landlord. I mean, the companies that are located in those buildings. getting involved and supporting the community there in terms of Harmon Field, in terms of the basketball. I mean, all of the facilities that are over there, I think, could use some help. And again, I think that could come from the private sector.
Now, do you believe that the West Edge Foundation is really respecting the residents of the Gaston Creek area?
I think they're trying to. I think that, again, I understand both sides of it. I think what's gone on to date has obviously not been, I would say, a resounding success on either side. And I go back to not looking back at what has been done, but how can we solve these issues and repair these relationships for the future moving forward. And I go back to the idea of a simple solution to me would be not just throw money at something, but really engage with how can we help the neighborhood and collectively, and how can we come together on common needs and amenities that will not just support the West the West Side neighborhood, but you have a lot of people living in apartments that, I'm sure they'd love to have playing fields that don't flood and rec centers that are more available to the public. So again, I would look forward on this rather than in the rearview mirror.
So what are the common needs of those people right now? And if you were to sit down at the table with the West Edge Foundation and those residents, what would you propose?
Again, I just go back to, I think, I would focus initially on how to support the amenities that serve the entire area, the entire western part of the Upper Peninsula. And I think that to me is smart for both sides.
And going back, obviously, to affordability, because that's an issue over there as well as the rest of the peninsula and other areas. But you talk about, obviously, affordability legislation. What type of legislation did you put forth when you were in the House?
Well, I was always supportive of the increasing the affordable housing tax credit, the state affordable housing tax credit, so that it was more closely aligned with the federal program. South Carolina has one of the lowest incentives in the country for affordable housing. I think that needs to change. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding at the state level, but being one of 124, it was difficult to get that actually to a committee hearing, let alone a vote on the floor. But I do have relationships there where I think, and certainly experience, that I think we would have a good shot at that. But it can't just happen from Charleston alone. Affordable housing is an issue in Greenville. It's an issue in Columbia. It's an issue in Rock Hill, Florence, Darlington, a number of different cities across the state. And so what I would propose there is not go it alone, but to coordinate with the governments of various other municipalities, have a collected effort and define legislation that we're proposing and getting behind and putting forth, working with our respective delegations to get it approved. And I think that's an efficient and effective way of doing things that I think would make a big difference.
What legislation can you get behind right now in Cogswell?
Well, a whole variety of different legislation. I mean, I think, again, I would be 100% in support of bolstering up our affordable housing tax credit. One thing that I did up there that I still am a big believer in, and my friend Wendell Gilliard has been a big champion of, is hate crimes legislation. I think that's important to have in the state. I know some people are against it, but I think it is an important piece of legislation for us to have in place. So that's another example of something that I would get behind. So, I mean, I could go down a whole host of different initiatives, but I do think what's important to do as a mayor is to work with your delegation, other cities, in their respective delegations to figure out what common needs are within municipalities and work collectively to get that legislation passed, like I referred to on the affordable housing. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. You need to put politics aside when it comes to the greater good for your given city.
So you talked earlier about that tax credit. What affordable incentives would you give to the residents of Charleston?
Well, again, I go back to an idea that I have on fixing the millage for residents that have been in their home as an owner-occupied homeowner for a certain period of time, be it 10 years, be it 20 years. I just don't think people like that should be priced out. And when you look at the county's budget and the city's budget in terms of where property tax revenues are coming from, I don't think that that's going to blow the budget, but it does take care of the people that live here. And I think that has been, that's long overdue.
So, okay, well, let me ask you this. What are the revenue trends right now for the city of Charleston?
Revenue trends are up for sure. Same thing with the county, but so are the expenses. And you see a lot of the expenses, actually, just this year alone, the expenses are exceeding the revenue. So what they've done, which is certainly within their right, is they've used their anticipated sales tax revenue to offset the millage increase that they've put into place. Well, I get that logic. It's a little bit of smoke and mirrors on the math because you're increasing taxes, but you're offsetting it by this anticipated sales tax revenue. But COVID taught us that you can't guarantee sales tax revenue. There's situations certainly that can result in lower sales tax revenue, and then you're just left with a tax increase. So I do think that we need to be cognizant of that. And I think when it comes to the expenses on the city side, we need to get those reined in a little bit. Not that we need to gut the city budget or gut the city staff or city services. I'm not suggesting that at all. But you can't deny the fact that we have an organizational chart that's probably older than I am. And sometimes you need to take a fresh look at how to make things more efficient that could actually provide better services to your constituencies.
So what is the current millage rate?
Gosh, you got me on that one. I'll have to look that up. I mean, I know they just increased it. I can't remember exactly by how much, but I'll have to get back to you on that one.
And you talked earlier, Cogswell, about obviously a lot of residents being priced out. But let me ask you, well then, how many residents in the city of Charleston has the city of Charleston lost in the past year or so because of that?
Well, the city's still growing. It's not losing residents. You're having a lot of people move in. So there's, I would say, a net increase in terms of people that have moved here versus people moving out. But you are seeing certain demographics, particularly African-American demographic, constantly shrinking year over year. And, you know, that's unacceptable to me. On the flip side, you do have a lot of people that are moving here, and COVID has accelerated that pretty dramatically. And I guess the only good news in that is that, not the only good news, but I think we are seeing a brain drain from other parts of the country to Charleston that are bringing a lot of interesting, smart, engaged people that are bringing their businesses here, and it's creating or adding to a very diverse economy that I think, you know, is the envy of a lot of the rest of the state and really, truly a lot of the rest of the country. But as mayor, you need to make sure that you embrace that, but also remember the people and take care of the people that have created the brand that everybody loves so much. And those are the people that have been here. So that's very important to me to make sure happens.
Now, okay, Cogswell, let me ask you this then. So what will be your plan? Because a lot of, the African-American residents lived here for a long time. They worked here for a long time. They owned homes for a long time here on the peninsula. What is your plan? And I know the city's growing, but what is your plan to bring some of those people back?
Well, I think it can be, it goes back to making sure they don't leave to begin with, right? And that goes back to my idea on millage and fixing the millage for owner-occupied homes, especially those that have been certainly generational. And that's true not just for the African American community, but the white communities as well. And so, again, I think that just shows a focus on making sure these folks that have invested and built Charleston, helped build Charleston to what it is today, aren't penalized for that. In terms of bringing people back, that's a taller order. I think that goes back to providing more affordable alternatives, not just on the peninsula, but elsewhere. And I think you need to have a very robust and aggressive affordable housing plan, which I know that the current mayor touts his accomplishments on affordable housing and what's in the pipeline, but the reality of it is it's not even close to what's needed. And so we can't keep doing more of the same there. We need to be even more aggressive and more creative. It isn't just government paying for all of this. There are ways to bring in other funding besides the city's budget, like, for example, working with the state on the state housing tax credit. So anyway, I could walk through a lot of details on that, but it is important, incredibly important, to make sure that people that have been here, that have created the brand through businesses and just supporting the community and living here, that they're not penalized for our own success.
And I want to get Mayor Tecklenburg on Quintin's close-ups to get his side of the story on that as well. But quickly, I think I have maybe 11 minutes before Zoom cuts me off, but I want to talk to you about the Union Pier. But let me go quickly to, obviously, what you talked about earlier, which is affordable housing. So what's more important for the city right now? Building new homes and commercial space, or rehabbing, expanding, and better utilizing existing homes?
I think it's both. I think you have to do both in order to solve it. I think you've got scenarios where the city and the housing authority owns a lot of property. And I think you need to figure out ways to better utilize some of that property. Not that you want to replace anybody that's there, but I think it is certainly underutilized. So I think that's a solution that I would explore pretty heavily. And in terms of other businesses, commercial space, I think it's important to have spaces for businesses, opportunities for small businesses to own their own properties. And, I think there are ways for the city to help on that. They cannot be the only solution to it. And again, I think you look at different ways to bring in other parties, be it state, federal, county, but private sector as well.
So let me ask you this, Cogswell. What would be your strategic plan to actually utilize the space or the properties that the city and the housing authority actually use right now?
Well, I'll give you an example, Quintin. They had, we spent $20 million, there was a bond referendum in 2017 for $20 million for affordable housing. In the 5 years prior to that affordable housing, before that bond issuance, there were more affordable housing units delivered in those 5 years prior to that $20 million bond issuance than the 5 years after. To me, that doesn't make any sense and the math doesn't add up. So that money, if you're going to do something and you're going to ask for money from the voters for things like that, you need to have a very defined plan as to how you're going to implement it and how you're going to really make meaningful efforts to solve the affordable housing crisis that I think we have. So I would say from my standpoint, there's only one way to go, and that's up. But if you want to get into specific properties that the city owns, I think you don't want to just concentrate it all in one area. I mean, there are areas that need affordable housing that aren't just on the peninsula. They're in West Ashley, they're on Johns Island, James Island, and I think Daniel Island as well. One of the first successful affordable housing projects that was done in this city in the past 20 years was done on Daniel Allen. So there are ways to do it. The possibilities I'm excited by. And again, if you look at what my track record is on coming up with ideas and figuring out pragmatic ways to put those ideas out of the pages of a study and into reality, I have a pretty good track record of doing that.
So what would be your livability study for the city of Charleston?
The livability can encompass a whole host of different things. I mean, again, everything from probably consolidating things like trash services to, working with the county and the state on how to solve for the myriad of different road responsibilities that we have. I mean, how often do you hear, well, city can't do anything about your pothole because that's a state or county road, and then everybody's just pointing their fingers at one another. There, I think, is a solution to that. It just takes rolling up your sleeves and getting to work on it. So that's roads, that's trash in terms of livability. There's a whole myriad of different things. Again, I go back to crime. Some of my ideas there on not just supporting the police, but also doing longer term community building initiatives that I think will help the crime rate in the long haul. It's that question could hold a lot of answers, Quintin. I think I've given you some that I think it paints the picture, perhaps.
And I would love to get you back on Quintin's Close-Up so we can talk more in depth. And I have so many more questions to ask you. But in the 6 minutes that I have left, let's talk about Union Pier. According to WCBD, the South Carolina Ports Authority submitted a draft of their planned unit development to the city of Charleston just on January 30th. The PUD breaks down to propose redevelopment of the 70-acre space. The draft includes 270,000 square feet of retail and commercial use, another 270,000 square feet of office space, a nearly 20-acre park, 600 hotel units, and 1,600 residential units. Concord Street, which runs down the middle of the proposed mixed-use site, which would actually feature buildings as tall as 7 stories. So you are a developer. So what are your development height concerns with this particular project?
I think the port is doing is understandable. They're trying to maximize the value at this PUD because they want to get as much money as they can off of that property. That's understandable. That's the reality. But the city needs to be extremely, extremely proactive, which in my mind they have not been, on defining what they want to see out of the Union Pier redevelopment. And that can be affordable housing, that can be affordable commercial space, that could be more green space. And all of that can be incorporated and should be incorporated into any sort of PUD that they approve. Now, in fairness to the port, I do think that they would need to be compensated for part of that. And if the city wants to do and should do affordable housing or more public space there, that there's a price that they need to pay for that, and they can pay for that through things like tax increment financing district, municipal improvement districts. That can be paid out over a long period of time and are a good return on investment for the city. What I would not want to see happen there is everything maxed out for value for the port and the green space being paid for out of the small amount of green space that's on the dock over the water, which you can't really build anything there to begin with. All of that paid for by tip dollars. So there's really nothing to go back to other initiatives like, again, more public space that connects to East Bay, more opportunities for affordable housing, more opportunities for commercial space that could be geared towards small business owners. So my frustration on Union Pier is that the city has been almost completely reactive to the plans that have been put forth. If it were up to me, I would have been sitting down with the port in the very beginning with the public's input, but coming up with the plan that we'd like to see and council would like to see come out of Union Pier, not get a proposal from them, and then just react to it. So I would have handled it very differently than where it is right now.
So is the interior of the project Cogswell, is that too dense?
I think seven. I mean, if you take a look at what Ansonboro, the neighborhood next door to it, and you overlay what's in Ansonboro onto Union Pier, it's extremely different. Now, do I think Ansonboro needs to be an exact replica on Union Pier? Not necessarily. I mean, I understand that there's a need for higher density, just given the demands that we have. But I think there's a place in the middle, and that doesn't necessarily need to be at the ports, solely on the shoulder of the port. I do think that if you look at the sources and uses on how to fund something like that, the city, if they were to take initiative on doing their own math, they could come out with a way that I think truly would be a win-win. That would give the port the money that they need to invest in their operations at Letterman Terminal, but not leave the city with something that is unaffordable and at a density level that is certainly not in keeping with the rest of the peninsula.
And in 20 seconds, would a TIF be a bit of a crutch to development there?
Well, I mean, if you're familiar with a TIF, a TIF, basically, everyone talks about what the tax revenues will be, but I mean, if there's a TIF put in place, which I suspect there will be, there won't be any tax revenues to the city for at least 25 years, because it'll all go to be paying for the infrastructure. So to me, that's city dollars that should be going towards things like public space that ultimately makes the real estate more valuable too. I mean, look at the property around places like Central Park. I mean, if you have public space and civic space that are open to the community at large, it is beneficial to the real estate around it. So it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, and I feel like that's been lost in this conversation.
This all will be to be continued, because I have so many questions lined up here for you. But Williams Cogswell, mayoral candidate for the city of Charleston and businessman and entrepreneur, thank you for your time and welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.